Okay, Aaron. So what we're looking at is the locus of one of the space-time coordinate communication messages that we received either yesterday or today. It's either from yesterday and it's carried over today, and it's still on the table, or it was placed on the table today. And in the background, as we're listening to this, as I'm giving this lecture, we're also listening to YouTube, and specifically to More Mother on YouTube. And I have the autoplay on so that we can pass what someone else would call randomly, or as the algorithm determines, or as some intelligent entity determines, when this particular More Mother song is over. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, this particular song is called Black Flight, and this is another image of flight. But let me go back to the space-time coordinate that we're interpreting, and say something about it in connection to interpretation strategies of space-time travel communication coordinates in general, and of the hermeneutics, and especially we've been talking about contextualization of message systems as they exist in space-time systems, not as they exist in say new criticism or reader response theory, in the sense of those kinds of activities typically being disengaged from space and time, determined, right, modalities of interpretation. All right, so this is the coordinate, and good news, suggests obviously that something positive, and this idea of news. So very simply makes me think of something topical, and an event that that we would be enthusiastic about. And particularly in this moment, there's so much bad news, and let me before I get to the good news, give an inventory of the bad news. All right, so in the inventory of the bad news, Roe versus Wade, of course, has been overturned by the Supreme Court, and women's rights, and the rights of transgender and gay and lesbian individuals are now seriously threatened in the United States, and this is, of course, and obviously an example of bad news. And if we were looking for the good news on that side, we would have to look at the kinds of responses that individuals across the country are engaging in terms of activism and protest, both in DC and in local theaters of political engagement. And another example of bad news that I've mentioned before is in our struggle to save the lives of children and youth, from the destruction by gun violence. The statistics for children's death by gun violence has now become the number one cause and source of the destruction of children's lives, of human life in the United States, and has surpassed what was formerly the leading cause of children's death in the United States, which was car accidents, and the continued bad news around that particular locus of the human destruction is that no significant laws are emerging from our knowledge of these statistics or events such as the mass murder in Buffalo, which we're still mourning and trying to process. No significant legislation seems to be emerging from our knowledge of these statistics and these events, and these events are not localized in any way, shape, or form, because they also enter into our consciousness as an aspect of the violence and assaults that we face on a daily basis in our lives. And so even if we don't reside in Buffalo, and even if we don't know anyone personally who was murdered in Buffalo, and even if we don't frequent that particular store outlet, Tops, we still suffer from the trauma of the threat of these types of violence by their repetitions and reiterations, and the fact that these politicians whose jobs are to protect our security and to establish frameworks of equality and social justice and care and stability in our lives are really failing and continue to be failing to do that. So thinking about some of these things and looking for good news is highly welcome as a communication, and that's the psychological context, but also the topical context out of which this message seems to express itself and reach out as a kind of vector or index of pointing and a guide to look for, right? So a suggestion of seeking good news. So one of my favorite and not necessarily because it's politically in line with my views, and I do believe that it has become more conservative over the years, and particularly as its need to find itself supported by advertisement has increased, but still one of my favorite sources for news is National Public Radio. It used to be that I would listen to it on the radio, and I remember following the Rodney King verdict and the riots that began in LA but that spread all across the nation. NPR coverage was really actually pretty good, and NPR coverage of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa was also particularly good. And I miss I miss the great days of National Public Radio past, but I still look at it, even though today it's a little different than what we used to perceive, right, as National Public Radio. But one of the events that's documented today on National Public Radio, when I was looking for a context for this good news, is is the opposite of good news. A record 100 million people have been forced from their homes, and this is an example of human displacement, right? And as I've narrated and commented upon in my overview of my past work as an artist and as engaged in social critique and in social justice, is that since the very early 80s, human displacement has been a focus of a large part of the work that I've done, particularly as a performance artist, more as a performance artist than as a poet, because I don't know why. Really, it has worked. My ability, I guess, to express concern and relate information in relationship to this particular topic has somehow found itself easier to articulate in the realm of performance than as literature. But it has been a central concern for I guess what amounts to nearly 40 years now. So 35 maybe, I guess. And 100 million displaced individuals is extraordinarily troubling. Particularly, I suppose, because the work that I've performed in this area has been an attempt, at consciousness raising and consciousness raising is always, an attempt to change and challenge, what is the status quo, and to imagine, a world in which, if it's impossible to imagine a world in which there is no human displacement, at least to imagine a world in which there are systems in place to provide and care for individuals who are I don't like to use the word victim, but that who are subject to the forces of the traumas and violence of displacement. And of course, one of the reasons is and the important here the caption says something about this. A young immigrant cries after illegally crossing the Rio Grande River with her family in Eagle Pass, Texas. So just to remember, that the suffering of human displacement, right, is precisely what those individuals who support the border wall and who support the closed border, it's precisely what the sufferings and the tragedies and the traumas of human displacement are precisely what these individuals who refuse to see and who refuse, to open their eyes, open their ears, and open their hearts to the vastness of this tragedy and trauma, are refusing to recognize, refusing to act compassionately toward who are disavowing, these tragedies. And I think it's kind of ironic, that when Republicans like Mitch McConnell go and meet with Ukrainian presidents and shake hands and talk about their commitment to supporting this war against the Russians in the Ukraine, fail to recognize the coldness of their response to similarly displaced children and parents and families at our own border. So the hypocrisy of that should not go unexamined and overlooked and disregarded, right? A lot of the displacement, and probably what contributed, most significantly to the rise, in this number from 90 million to 100 million, is the fact that there are 14 million people, human lives, displaced by the Russian war of genocide against the Ukrainians. And the real issue, in terms of the response to these tragedies and these traumas, is right in this word, right? Compassion, and the compassion has to be there across the board. It can't just be there for Ukrainians because it's a soundbite for someone like Mitch McConnell or someone else who want to present themselves as belonging to this positionality of caring. It has to be there across the board. You have to be able to see what you're doing, when you support a border wall, that you're supporting dispassionate, responses to human displacement, and it's not just the border wall, right? It's all kinds of immigration policy, and it's all kinds of deportation policy. It's all kind of rights to citizenship and who belongs here and who doesn't. It's also it's also what we're doing when we fail to allow people to vote in our election systems, right? By putting obstacles in the path of individuals who don't live near a poll or don't have a street address, or these individuals become, in a metaphorical way, displaced from our democracy, but in a real literal way, threatened, by their displacement, by their symbolic displacement, and not having the right to vote, as being, potentially disenfranchised, and then hence, materially, disenfranchised. And this happens all the time. And, not just by gentrification, but, by an economic system that fails to offer a living wage, to individuals who perhaps for one reason or another, didn't have access to the same educational resources that others did, and who have to turn, to other means of survival, and those means, may or may not, result in death, incarceration, homelessness, and all of these, death, incarceration. Death is the ultimate human displacement, right? Incarceration is also a form of human displacement, and so is homelessness, and so there are a lot of methods and means, to accomplish human displacement and to invalidate, our concerns and compassion for those that are suffering from it. Anyway, I didn't find my good news, here. and so I continue to look for that good news, and I didn't find my good news here either. We certainly understand the need for individuals to face justice, for their criminal and human rights violating actions, but the fact of an individual instance of justice isn't enough to express an idea of good news. And what I decided must be the good news is this article right here, at least if we're limited to because it can't be this article about the Southern Baptist Church, the same type of organization that's currently denying women the rights to exist, essentially, and the rights to make choices about the outcome of their own lives, the outcomes of their own narratives, the autonomy over their own bodies. Certainly can't be there. Although we can clearly point to the hypocrisy. But the good news must be here. And so take a look at this particular article, and the good news is that as it says right here, COVID-19 vaccinations are now available for children 6 months to under 5 years of age, and that's extraordinary, and that's extraordinarily good news, and this means that all children can safely attend public education, systems of public education in the United States. And it means that there should be in place a means of providing these vaccinations free of charge to children across the United States, and hopefully that will happen. But the exciting thing here is that the efficacy for the vaccine is very high, 80.3%, which is if you look at analyses of other types of vaccines, it's actually quite high. And again, here's the quotation: meets apparently all immunobridging criteria required for emergency use authorization. And it'll presumably continue to get better, and the efficacy rate will presumably continue to rise as it's produced and as it's continued testing. So if that's not Aaron, if that's not the good news, I guess, I suppose it could be. Perhaps the good news is that for one night only, Harry Styles' show brings fans from across the world to Long Island.